I'm Sarah Miller, 29 years old, and I never thought I'd be sitting at my father-in-law's 65th birthday dinner watching my mother-in-law slip something into my drink. Barbara had always made it clear I wasn't good enough for her. Precious son, but this was crossing a line. I watched as she placed the glass in front of me with a satisfied smirk, her eyes gleaming with anticipation as I reached for it. In that split second, I made a decision that would change our family forever. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below. Hit subscribe if you want to hear how my mother-in-law's plan completely backfired that night, and stay tuned for the full story that left the entire family speechless. Before this disastrous dinner, I was just a normal woman trying to navigate the complicated world of in-law relationships. I worked as a digital marketing manager after switching careers from journalism, which gave me an analytical mind and a keen eye for details others might miss. I met my husband Michael at my college roommate's wedding 4 years ago. He caught my eye across the reception hall, tall with kind brown eyes and a smile that made the room feel warmer. He asked me to dance, stepped on my toes twice, and made me laugh so hard I spilled champagne on his rented tux. We were inseparable from that night forward. When Michael first introduced me to his parents 6 months into our relationship, I noticed immediately how different they were from each other. Robert, his father, welcomed me with a bear hug and genuine interest in my life and career. He asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to my answers, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he laughed. Barbara, however, greeted me with a tight smile that never reached her eyes, her handshake cool and brief. "So, you're the new girlfriend?" she'd said, looking me up and down as if appraising merchandise. I dismissed the chill I felt as first meeting nerves and tried harder to win her approval. Looking back, there were so many red flags I chose to ignore, like how Barbara would call Michael multiple times during our dates with emergencies that somehow always resolved themselves once our evening was ruined, or how she'd make subtle comments about my appearance. "That dress is so brave of you," or "I wish I had your confidence to leave the house without makeup." Michael always had a complicated relationship with his mother. He loved her deeply, but seemed perpetually caught between wanting her approval and needing to establish his independence. With his father, things were simpler. They shared a love of baseball, fishing trips, and bad jokes. Michael's sister Jennifer had an even, more strained relationship with Barbara. During a girls' lunch, she warned me that Barbara had a habit of testing Michael's girlfriends. Apparently, she'd orchestrated situations to see if previous girlfriends were worthy of her son, from deliberately serving food they were allergic to spreading rumors to see if they'd confront her. I thought Jennifer was exaggerating, until I witnessed Barbara's behavior at our engagement dinner, where she announced she was giving away her baby as if I were kidnapping him. My own parents provided such a stark contrast. They welcomed Michael into our family with genuine warmth, including him in inside jokes and family traditions without a second thought. Dad taught him how to make his famous smoked ribs, and Mom added his birthday to her calendar of family celebrations. I tried everything to build a relationship with Barbara. I remembered her favorite flowers for her birthday, asked for her treasured family recipes, and always brought thoughtful hostess gifts. Each attempt was met with lukewarm acknowledgement at best, outright dismissal at worst. She'd place my carefully chosen gifts in a drawer without opening them or accidentally throw away the cookies I'd baked using her recipe. Michael often downplayed his mother's behavior, saying, "That's just Mom being Mom," or "She'll warm up to you eventually." But as months turned into years, her coldness only seemed to intensify rather than thaw. Family gatherings became exercises in anxiety management for me. I'd prepare for days, rehearsing neutral topics of conversation and practicing calming breathing techniques. The knot in my stomach would form as soon as we turned onto their street and wouldn't dissolve until we were safely back home. Things took a darker turn when Jennifer confided that Barbara had actively sabotaged Michael's previous serious relationship. She'd intercepted messages, lost important mail, and even impersonated him on a call to his girlfriend's workplace. I began noticing how Barbara controlled Robert too, deciding which friends they could see, interrupting him when he spoke, and making decisions without consulting him. When Robert's 65th birthday approached, I suggested we take them on a weekend trip to celebrate, but Barbara insisted on hosting a dinner at their home. "Robert prefers a quiet celebration with just family," she declared, though Robert himself brightened at our vacation idea. Michael, eager to keep the peace, sided with his mother, and I reluctantly agreed to attend the dinner, never imagining it would become the night that exposed decades of manipulation and changed our family forever. Over the 2 years of our marriage, Barbara's passive-aggressive behavior had escalated from subtle digs to more overt actions. Last Christmas, she accidentally spilled red wine on my cream silk dress minutes before family photos were taken. She conveniently had a spare outfit that fit her perfectly, while I appeared in all the holiday photos with a massive stain across my chest. Then there were the unannounced visits. Barbara developed a habit of showing up at our home without warning, always when Michael was at work and I was alone. "I was just in the neighborhood," she'd say, pushing past me into our living room where she'd proceed to critique everything from our furniture arrangement to the cleanliness of our baseboards. The most unsettling incident occurred when we returned from a week-long vacation to find several rooms in our house rearranged. Michael called his mother to ask if she'd been in our home, and she admitted using the spare key to water the plants, but couldn't understand why we were upset that she'd improved our living space. When I expressed my discomfort with these boundary violations, Michael found himself caught in an impossible position. "She's my mother, Sarah. She means well," he'd say, his face strained with the effort of mediating between the two women he loved most. Our arguments about Barbara became more frequent and heated. "You need to set boundaries with her," I'd insist, frustrated that he couldn't see the pattern of behavior that was so obvious to me. "You're overreacting," he'd counter, though his voice lacked conviction. The situation escalated when I came home early from work one day to find Barbara going through my desk drawers. She claimed she was looking for a pen, but the open journal and scattered personal documents told a different story. I later discovered from our joint credit card statement that she'd ordered a copy of my credit report online. When confronted, she said she was just making sure Michael wasn't making a mistake by being with someone financially irresponsible. Barbara began a subtle campaign to convince Michael I was mentally unstable. "Sarah seems so stressed lately," she'd say within his earshot. "I'm worried about her emotional state." Or, "Has Sarah always been this sensitive? It's not normal to cry over simple criticism." My anxiety before family gatherings grew so intense that I began experiencing physical symptoms, migraines, stomach issues, even hives. Jennifer, who had experienced similar treatment from Barbara, became my unexpected ally. Over coffee one afternoon, she warned me that Barbara's behavior was escalating. "Be careful," she said, eyes darting nervously, as if Barbara might overhear. "When she feels threatened, she gets worse, much worse." Jennifer shared stories of Barbara's feuds with neighbors and former friends, relationships destroyed over perceived slights, rumors spread, and social circles manipulated, until the offending person was isolated and discredited. The food allergy incident happened at Easter dinner. Despite being clearly informed of my shellfish allergy, Barbara served crab cakes as an appetizer, assuring me they were vegetarian. One bite sent me into an allergic reaction that ended with an EpiPen injection and a trip to urgent care. Barbara was full of apologies, claiming she forgot about my allergy, but I caught the satisfied gleam in her eye as the ambulance arrived. My therapist suggested techniques for managing the stress of these interactions while acknowledging the seriousness of Barbara's behavior. "These aren't normal mother-in-law issues," she warned. "This sounds like potential personality disorder territory." Robert, for his part, seemed oblivious to the extent of his wife's manipulations. In private moments, he would acknowledge that Barbara could be difficult or set in her ways, but he'd spent decades adapting to her behavior rather than confronting it. Barbara's most insidious tactic was her attempt to isolate Michael from me. She created emergencies requiring his immediate attention whenever we had special plans. She reminded him constantly of family obligations and traditions that somehow never included me. She spoke nostalgically of his ex-girlfriends and suggested meeting up with old family friends who, coincidentally, had single daughters. The final straw came the week before Robert's birthday dinner when Michael's cousin called to offer congratulations. Confused, Michael asked what he was being congratulated for. Apparently, Barbara had told extended family members that I was preventing Michael from starting a family because I was too career-focused, and that we were having marital problems as a result. In reality, we had agreed to wait another year before trying for children. The revelation led to our biggest fight yet. "This has to stop," I insisted, pacing our bedroom while Michael sat deflated on the edge of our bed. "Your mother is actively trying to destroy our marriage." Michael was torn between defending his mother and acknowledging the growing evidence of her interference. "Maybe we should skip Dad's birthday dinner," he suggested half-heartedly, knowing his father would be hurt by his absence. "No," I decided, a plan forming in my mind. "We're going, but I'm going to document everything your mother does. I'm bringing my phone and recording any interaction with her. If she tries anything, we'll have proof." Michael reluctantly agreed, though I could tell he still hoped I was exaggerating the threat his mother posed. Neither of us could have predicted just how far Barbara would go that night, or how her actions would finally expose decades of manipulation to the entire family. We arrived at the pristine colonial home where Michael had grown up precisely at 6, the gravel driveway already filled with cars. Barbara and Robert's house always reminded me of a museum, immaculately kept but cold, with furniture that seemed more for display than comfort. The walls were lined with family photos chronicling Michael's childhood, his sister Jennifer's accomplishments, and Barbara and Robert's 40 years together. I noticed not for the first time that photos including me were conspicuously absent, even our professional wedding portrait that I'd given them framed last Christmas. Barbara answered the door in a perfectly pressed navy dress, her silver hair styled precisely, not a strand out of place. "Michael, darling," she exclaimed, embracing him while barely acknowledging my presence with a curt nod. Robert appeared behind her, his kind face lighting up at the sight of both of us. "Sarah! Michael! So glad you could make it," he boomed, wrapping me in a genuine hug that smelled of his signature woodsy cologne. Inside, Jennifer and her husband Steve were already seated in the living room, along with Michael's Uncle Harold and Aunt Diane. Jennifer shot me a subtle, sympathetic glance as Barbara ushered us in. "Sarah, that outfit is very casual," Barbara commented, eyeing my elegant burgundy wrap dress that I'd carefully selected as appropriate for the occasion. "I would have thought you'd dress up for Robert's special day." I bit back a retort, reminding myself of my promise to Michael to keep the peace. The living room was arranged with precision. Barbara had placed name cards on each seat, separating Michael and me on opposite sides of the room. "Can I help with anything in the kitchen?" I offered, following standard politeness protocols, despite knowing what the answer would be. "No, thank you," Barbara replied stiffly. "I have everything under control. Unlike some people, I know how to properly prepare a family meal." The barb wasn't subtle, referencing the last holiday where she had criticized my turkey as undercooked, despite the meat thermometer showing a perfect temperature. Robert seemed oblivious to the underlying current of tension, happily discussing the baseball season with Harold. Jennifer made several attempts to include me in conversations, asking about my recent work promotion and our plans for summer vacation. Each time, Barbara would interject with a comment that redirected attention elsewhere. "Speaking of vacations," she announced loudly, cutting across my response about our planned trip to Maine. "Did I tell everyone that Michael's high school girlfriend Melissa is back in town? She just got back from volunteering in Africa. Such a giving person." I caught Michael's uncomfortable expression from across the room as he quickly changed the subject. As we moved toward pre-dinner drinks, I noticed Barbara's unusual focus on the beverage preparations. Typically, Robert was the family bartender, proud of his old-fashioned mixing skills, but tonight Barbara had insisted on handling the cocktails herself. "I've created a special birthday drink for Robert," she explained when Diane offered to help. From my position near the kitchen doorway, I observed Barbara methodically arranging glasses on a silver tray, paying particular attention to their placement. Michael was deep in conversation with his uncle, missing the intensity with which his mother organized the drinks. The dinner table had been set with Barbara's finest china and crystal, a testament to her performing the role of perfect hostess. Each place setting was immaculate with polished silverware and precisely folded napkins. As we took our assigned seats, Barbara once again ensuring Michael and I were separated, she began making pointed comments about my career choices. "I just don't understand people who prioritize work over family," she said, looking directly at me while serving the first course, a butternut squash soup. In my day, we knew what was truly important. Robert attempted to steer the conversation toward more neutral territory. Sarah's company is doing some fascinating work with digital marketing strategies, he offered kindly. She was telling me about it last month. Before I could elaborate, Barbara swiftly redirected. Robert doesn't want to talk about boring business. At his birthday dinner, she declared, though Robert's interested expression suggested otherwise. Throughout the appetizer course, I became increasingly aware of Barbara's unusual behavior. She seemed hyper-aware of my every movement, her eyes tracking me with an intensity that made the hairs on my arms stand up. When she excused herself to prepare the special birthday cocktails, I noticed she took her purse with her to the kitchen, an odd choice that triggered my journalist's instinct that something wasn't right. Jennifer must have noticed my unease because she squeezed my hand under the table when Barbara announced it was time for the birthday toast. I've prepared something special for everyone, Barbara said, her voice carrying an undertone I couldn't quite identify as she returned from the kitchen with a tray of identical-looking crystal glasses filled with an amber liquid. A signature cocktail to celebrate my beloved husband's 65 years. As Barbara carefully distributed the drinks, I noticed her hands trembling slightly, not with age or infirmity, but with what appeared to be anticipation. She placed each glass with deliberate precision, and when she reached me, her eyes locked with mine for a fraction too long, her lips curving into what I could only describe as a victorious smile. The glass she set before me looked almost identical to the others, but I noticed it had a slightly different garnish, an extra twist of lemon peel that curled distinctively. To Robert, Barbara said, raising her own glass once everyone had been served. The most patient man in the world. Everyone laughed at what seemed like a lighthearted joke, but something in Barbara's tone made me hesitate as I reached for my drink. After distributing the regular drinks, Barbara announced she'd be making her signature cocktails for the toast. Robert deserves something special for his milestone birthday, she insisted when Robert offered to help. I want to do this myself. Her unusual protectiveness of the drink preparation process raised my internal alarms. Can I help carry anything? I volunteered, hoping to observe her process. Absolutely not, Barbara replied sharply. These are made with a special recipe. Just stay seated. As the main course was being finished, I excused myself to use the restroom, deliberately choosing the powder room that required passing the kitchen. The door was partially open, and what I saw inside froze me in my tracks. Barbara stood at the counter with her back to the door, hunched over the drinks. In her hand was a small amber vial, from which she was carefully adding drops to one specific glass. She glanced around furtively before returning the vial to her cardigan pocket, unaware of my presence in the hallway. I silently retreated a few steps, then made an obvious sound approaching to alert her to my presence. When I passed the kitchen doorway again, Barbara was arranging the glasses on a silver tray, her face composed into a mask of innocence. My mind raced with possibilities. What had she put in the drink? Was it meant to make me sick, embarrass me, or something worse? I debated confronting her immediately, but realized it would be my word against hers without proof. Instead, I decided to watch and gather evidence first. My instincts from my journalist days kicked in. Observe, document, then act. Back at the table, I discreetly texted Jennifer under the tablecloth. Watch Barbara with the drinks. Something's off. Jennifer's eyes widened slightly as she read the message, giving me a subtle nod. Barbara entered with the tray of cocktails, moving around the table with unusual precision in her service. Uncle Harold, this one's for you, she said pleasantly, placing a glass before Michael's uncle. Diane, here's yours. She continued around the table, her movements becoming more deliberate as she approached my seat. The glass she placed before me had a distinctive double twist of lemon peel, setting it apart from the others if you were looking carefully. And for Sarah, she said, her voice carrying a slight edge that only I seemed to notice. I watched as she placed an identical-looking drink, but with a single lemon twist in front of Robert, who sat beside me. Barbara returned to her seat at the head of the table but remained unusually focused on me rather than engaging in conversation. She maintained a facade of casual interest in the dinner discussion, while her eyes repeatedly darted to my untouched glass. Jennifer caught my eye across the table, a questioning look on her face as she observed her mother's fixation. The conversation around us continued, Robert talking about his plans for retirement, Harold discussing his recent fishing trip, but I was acutely aware of Barbara watching me, waiting for me to drink. My glass sat before me, innocent-looking, yet potentially dangerous. What exactly had she put in it? Would it make me ill enough to leave, creating the impression I couldn't handle family gatherings? Would it cause me to act erratically, supporting her narrative that I was unstable? The possibilities made my heart pound against my ribs. Michael remained oblivious to the silent drama unfolding, engaged in conversation with Steve about a recent sporting event. I couldn't alert him without causing a scene, which would play right into Barbara's hands if there was nothing wrong with the drink. The room seemed to grow quieter as Barbara's attention intensified, her pretense of following the dinner conversation becoming thinner. "Aren't you going to try your cocktail, Sarah?" she finally asked, her voice honeyed, but her eyes sharp. I made it specially. All eyes turned to me as I smiled politely and reached toward my glass, Barbara's expression shifting subtly to one of anticipation, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth as she watched my fingers close the distance to the drink she had prepared just for me. "This looks delicious, Barbara," I said calmly, my hand hovering near my glass. Then, turning to Robert with a warm smile, I added, "But I notice Robert's drink looks extra special for the birthday boy. Would you mind if I toasted with your glass instead? It seems fitting since we're celebrating you today." Without waiting for a response, I smoothly picked up Robert's glass and raised it in a toast. "To many more years of health and happiness, Robert." The transformation in Barbara's face was instantaneous and profound. Her satisfied smirk collapsed into an expression of naked horror, her complexion draining to a sickly pale shade that made her carefully applied blush stand out like fever spots. "That's very thoughtful of you, Sarah," Robert replied, pleased by my apparent gesture of respect, completely missing his wife's distress as he reached for what was originally my glass. "You've always been so considerate." Michael, still oblivious to the undercurrents, raised his own glass in support of my toast. "To Dad!" Barbara's hand shot out with unexpected speed, nearly knocking over the centerpiece. "Wait!" she exclaimed, her voice unnaturally high. "That one has—" She stopped abruptly, realizing she had no explanation that wouldn't incriminate her. "Has what, Barbara?" I asked innocently, maintaining direct eye contact while taking a small sip from Robert's glass. The entire table had gone silent, attention shifting between Barbara's flustered state and my composed questioning. "Different proportions," Barbara finished weakly. "I made yours less strong because I know you don't drink much." But it was too late. Robert had already taken a generous swallow from the glass intended for me, smacking his lips appreciatively. "Tastes fine to me," he commented, though his forehead wrinkled slightly. "Maybe a bit more bitter than usual." Jennifer's eyes widened as she pieced together what was happening, her gaze darting between her mother's panicked expression and my deliberate calm. Barbara's agitation manifested physically as she reached for her water glass, knocking over her own cocktail in the process. The amber liquid spread across the pristine white tablecloth like a guilty confession. "Oh, let me help with that," I offered, standing to grab a napkin while keeping my eyes fixed on Robert, monitoring for any signs of distress. "No!" Barbara snapped with unusual vehemence. "Just leave it. I'll handle it." Her hands shook noticeably. As she blotted at the spill, eyes continuously flicking to Robert, who was now frowning slightly. "Is there something odd about this drink?" Robert asked, examining the glass. "It has an unusual aftertaste." Barbara lunged forward, reaching for his glass. "Let me make you a fresh one for your birthday, dear. That one might have gotten warm." Robert pulled the glass back, his expression puzzled at his wife's intensity. "It's fine, Barbara. No need to fuss." He took another sip, seemingly to prove his point. The dinner conversation resumed awkwardly, with Barbara barely participating, her attention fixed almost exclusively on Robert. Michael finally began to notice something unusual in his mother's behavior, catching my eye with a questioning look that I answered with a subtle headshake. "Not now." Jennifer kept glancing between her father and mother, clearly putting the pieces together but unsure how to proceed. As the minutes ticked by, Robert's demeanor began to shift. His face flushed, unevenly blotchy red patches appearing on his cheeks and forehead. His contributions to the conversation became slower, his words occasionally slurring slightly. "Is it hot in here?" he asked, tugging at his collar. "I'm feeling a bit strange." Barbara's attempt to appear concerned couldn't mask her rising panic. "You're probably just tired, dear. You've been working so hard in the garden today." Uncle Harold frowned, leaning forward to look more closely at his brother. "You don't look right, Rob. How much have you had to drink tonight?" Robert shook his head slowly, confusion evident in his expression. "Just this one cocktail. I haven't even finished it." Aunt Diane, a retired nurse, was watching Robert with growing professional concern. "Robert, are you on any new medications? You're showing signs of some kind of reaction." Barbara interrupted quickly. "He's fine, just a bit overwhelmed by the celebration." But Robert was clearly not fine. His movements had become uncoordinated, his speech increasingly slurred. When he attempted to stand, he swayed dangerously, gripping the edge of the table for support. "I don't feel," he began, before his knees buckled and Michael jumped up to steady him. The carefully orchestrated birthday dinner had descended into chaos, with Robert obviously impaired from something more potent than a single cocktail. Barbara's face had transformed from panic to terror as she watched her plan spectacularly backfire, the poison she had intended for me now working its way through her husband's system instead. Robert's condition deteriorated rapidly, his coordination failing as Michael and Steve helped him to the living room sofa. His face had taken on a grayish tinge beneath the flush, and his speech had become almost unintelligible. "I think we should call an ambulance," Aunt Diane said firmly, her medical training overriding family politics. "This isn't normal." Barbara leapt to her feet, blocking Diane's path to the phone. No, that's completely unnecessary. He's just had too much to drink before dinner. I'll make some strong coffee." Jennifer stood up, her patience visibly snapping. "Mom, Dad has had exactly one drink." "What was in that cocktail?" Her tone left no room for evasion. Robert struggled to sit upright, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. "Only had one drink," he insisted, though the words slurred together. "Something's wrong with me." I maintained my composure, though my heart was pounding. "Barbara, I saw you in the kitchen adding something to one of the drinks from a small vial. The drink you specifically placed in front of me." The room went silent, all eyes turning to Barbara, whose face cycled through shock, outrage, and then calculated defensiveness. "That's ridiculous. I would never," she sputtered, but her performance lacked conviction. "If anything happened, it's because Sarah switched the glasses. She's trying to make me look bad." During this confrontation, Jennifer had slipped into the kitchen. She returned holding a small amber bottle, label clearly visible. "Sleep aids?" she questioned, holding up the vial I had seen Barbara using earlier. "Extra strength, prescription, dose." "Mom, what were you thinking?" Michael stared at his mother in disbelief, the evidence too clear to deny. "Mom, did you put sleeping pills in Sarah's drink?" His voice was quiet, but intense with dawning comprehension. Barbara's composure crumbled as the evidence mounted against her. "I just wanted her to leave early," she blurted out, immediately trying to backpedal. "Just a tiny dose to make her drowsy so she'd want to go home. I needed to talk to you alone." "Michael, she's turning you against me." Robert's expression of betrayal cut through his disorientation. "You drugged a drink?" he managed, each word a struggle. "For our daughter-in-law?" The family's shocked silence spoke volumes. Harold had already dialed poison control, describing the situation in low, urgent tones. "They say we need to get him to the emergency room," he reported, hanging up. "The combination of alcohol and sleeping medication can be dangerous, especially at his age." Michael turned to his mother, his face hardened with a resolve I'd never seen before. "How could you do this? What if Sarah had drunk that? What if she'd driven home afterward?" Barbara's strategy shifted to tears, her go-to manipulation when confronted. "You don't understand. She's taking you away from your family. Everything changed when she came into our lives," Jennifer scoffed audibly. "That's rich coming from you, Mom. Remember what you did to Steve at our engagement dinner? The special dessert that had him sick for 3 days? I never told anyone because I Was too embarrassed, but I knew it was you. Michael looked at his sister in shock. What? When did this happen? Jennifer's bitter laugh held years of suppressed knowledge. This isn't new behavior, Michael. Mom's been doing things like this for years. Ask Dad if you don't believe me. All eyes turned to Robert, who was struggling to stay conscious but nodded weakly. Your mother has her ways, he admitted, each word an effort. I've tried to talk to her about it for years. This revelation seemed to hit Michael hardest of all, the realization that his father had known about his mother's behavior and failed to stop it. You knew? He asked his father, voice breaking slightly. All this time? Uncle Harold intervened, his normally jovial face stern. This isn't the time for a family therapy session. Robert needs medical attention now. As Steve and Harold helped Robert to the car for the trip to the emergency room, Barbara made one last desperate attempt to regain control. This is all being blown out of proportion, she insisted, real panic in her voice now. It was just a little sleeping pill. Sarah's turning this into a spectacle because she's jealous of our family bond. The accusation was so absurd that Michael actually laughed, though there was no humor in the sound. Our family bond? Mom, you just poisoned Dad. How much clearer can it be that you're the problem here, not Sarah? Barbara recoiled as if struck, unused to direct confrontation from her son. Michael, how dare you speak to me that way, after everything I've sacrificed for you? Her attempts to reclaim moral high ground failed entirely as Michael turned away to help with his father. Jennifer approached me, speaking low enough that only I could hear. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I should have warned you more explicitly about what she's capable of. I squeezed her hand in silent understanding. As Robert was carefully loaded into Harold's car, with Diane accompanying them to monitor his condition, the birthday dinner stood abandoned. Elaborate food uneaten, gifts unopened, and the family, unity Barbara so fiercely claimed to protect shattered perhaps beyond repair. Michael turned to me, his face a complex mixture of apology, shock, and dawning comprehension. You were right, he said simply. All those times you were right about her. Barbara stood alone in the doorway, watching her careful facade of family perfectionism crumble around her, still clutching the emptied vial that had finally exposed decades of manipulation to the harsh light of truth. Once Robert had been safely dispatched to the hospital with Harold and Diane, the remaining family members gathered in the living room for a confrontation that had been brewing for decades. Barbara sat rigidly in her armchair, tears streaming down her face in what I recognized as a calculated display designed to evoke sympathy. I can't believe you're all attacking me like this, she sobbed, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Everything I've ever done has been for this family. I'd remained calm throughout the chaos, but my patience for Barbara's manipulation had finally reached its limit. Drugging someone's drink isn't an act of love, Barbara. It's a crime. Voice was steady, matching her gaze without flinching. What exactly were you hoping would happen to me tonight? Backed into a corner and with her usual tactics failing, Barbara's mask slipped completely. You were never supposed to be part of this family, she hissed, decades of resentment bubbling to the surface. You're not good enough for my son. You never appreciated our family traditions. You've changed Michael, turned him against me. Michael stepped forward, positioning himself symbolically between his mother and me. Mom, stop it. Sarah hasn't turned me against you. Your behavior has. He spoke with quiet authority that seemed to startle Barbara into momentary silence. I've been making excuses for you for years, telling myself you just needed time to adjust, that you meant well despite how your actions came across. But this crosses every line. Jennifer nodded vigorously from her position across the room. It's not just Sarah, Mom. You've done this to everyone Michael or I have ever cared about. Remember Steve's food poisoning at our engagement dinner? Or how my best friend Lisa suddenly lost her invitation to my bridal shower? Or the mix-up with the photographer that somehow excluded Tom's family from our wedding album? As Jennifer spoke, Barbara's expression shifted between defiance and calculation, clearly measuring which approach would be most effective. I was protecting you both, she insisted. Those people weren't right for our family. I could see it, even if you couldn't. Robert's absence loomed large in the room as Michael confronted a painful truth. Dad knew, didn't he? All these years, he knew what you were doing and just let it happen? The question hung in the air, unanswerable in Robert's absence, but Aunt Diane's call from the hospital provided indirect confirmation. The doctor says Robert will be okay, she reported, her voice crackling through the speakerphone Michael had activated. He's admitted this isn't the first time he's suspected Barbara of tampering with food or drinks, though it's the first time it's affected him directly. Barbara's indignant gasp was ignored as Diane continued. He's asked if he can stay with us for a while after he's discharged. I think that would be best. The significance of this request, Robert actively choosing to separate from his wife of 40 years, settled heavily on everyone in the room. Michael ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from moments of profound stress. I just don't understand, Mom. Why? What did Sarah ever do to you except love me and try to be part of this family? Barbara's response revealed the depths of her distorted thinking. She took you away from me. You used to call me every day, Michael. You came home every Sunday for dinner. Then she appeared, and suddenly my opinions didn't matter anymore. She changed you. The naked possessiveness in her voice made even Jennifer flinch. Mom, he grew up, Jennifer said quietly. That's what adult children do. They build their own lives. Michael was piecing together decades of manipulated perceptions. Is this why all my serious relationships before Sarah mysteriously fell apart? Did you sabotage those too? Barbara's silence was answer enough. What about Jennifer's college scholarship celebration? You told me she'd changed the date and didn't want me there because she was embarrassed by her small-town family. I missed one of the most important days of her life because of your lie? Jennifer's sharp intake of breath confirmed this was news to her. You told me Michael couldn't come because he had an important interview he couldn't reschedule. I was heartbroken he missed it. The siblings stared at each other, then at their mother, as decades of manufactured conflicts and misunderstandings clarified in a new and devastating light. This is what you've always done, isn't it? Michael asked quietly. Created problems between us so we'd both rely on you to fix them, so you'd always be at the center. Aunt Diane's voice from the speakerphone cut through the tense silence. Barbara has always needed to be needed, even as a young woman. Robert saw it when they were dating, but thought it was just insecurity that would improve with time. Instead, it got worse after you children were born. Barbara lunged for the phone. Diane, you have no right to discuss me like this. You never understood our family dynamic. Michael intercepted her, gently but firmly moving the phone out of her reach. I think we're finally understanding it all too clearly, Mom. As the night wore on, more stories emerged. Barbara reading Jennifer's diary and sharing embarrassing entries with relatives. Barbara telling Michael's high school girlfriend he'd been seen with another girl when he was actually on a fishing trip with Robert. Barbara reporting a neighbor to the homeowners association repeatedly until they moved away after they'd failed to invite her to a block party. Each revelation painted a clearer picture of a woman who couldn't tolerate any relationship that didn't include or center her. I think I need some time away from you, Mom, Michael finally said, the words clearly causing him pain despite their necessity. What you did tonight wasn't just mean or manipulative. It was dangerous and possibly criminal. Barbara's tears, which had been flowing strategically throughout the evening, suddenly stopped as she recognized the seriousness of her situation. You can't mean that. I'm your mother. Her voice had hardened, the vulnerability act abandoned in favor of authority. After everything I've sacrificed for you? Michael shook his head sadly. That manipulation won't work anymore. Not after tonight. As we prepared to leave, Barbara made one final desperate attempt. If you walk out that door with her tonight, don't bother coming back, she threatened, gesturing at me. Michael paused in the doorway, his response quiet but resolute. If that's your choice, Mom, I'll respect it. But I hope with time and probably some professional help, you'll reconsider. The drive home was mostly silent, both of us processing the seismic shift in family dynamics we'd just experienced. Michael reached across the console to take my hand, his voice thick with emotion when he finally spoke. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you sooner, and I'm terrified thinking about what might have happened if you'd drunk from that glass. I squeezed his hand in return, understanding that tonight was just the beginning of a long and painful reckoning for everyone involved, but also the first honest interaction his family had experienced in perhaps decades. The days following Robert's birthday dinner unfolded in a blur of family phone calls, medical updates, and emotional processing. Robert spent 2 nights in the hospital for observation, the combination of prescription-strength sleeping medication and alcohol having affected his system more severely than anticipated due to his age and blood pressure medication. He declined Barbara's attempts to visit, a boundary setting that shocked the extended family more than the drugging incident itself. "Dad's never stood up to Mom before," Jennifer told me during one of our now daily phone calls. "It's like something fundamentally shifted for him that night." Michael and I spent long hours talking through the implications of what had happened, our late-night conversations extending until dawn as he processed decades of manipulated perceptions. "I keep replaying conversations from years ago," he confessed, staring at the ceiling above our bed. "Arguments with friends, breakups with girlfriends, misunderstandings with Jennifer, wondering how many were engineered by Mom." I held him through the waves of anger, confusion, and grief that followed, understanding that he was mourning not just his relationship with his mother, but also the family narrative he'd believed his entire life. Barbara's response to the family's withdrawal was predictably dramatic. First came the tearful voicemails. "Michael, please call me back. There's been a terrible misunderstanding," followed by texts minimizing what had happened. "It was just a tiny bit of my sleep aid. Hardly enough to cause such a fuss." When these approaches failed, she escalated to showing up unannounced at our front door, sobbing dramatically until neighbors peered out their windows. "You can't shut me out," she wailed as Michael firmly but gently prevented her from entering our home. "I'm your mother. Family doesn't abandon family." Her performance might have been convincing had we not witnessed her cold calculation the night she poisoned the drink. Robert moved in temporarily with Harold and Diane, his absence from the family home representing the first separation in his 40-year marriage. "I've known Barbara had issues for years," he admitted during a private lunch with Michael. "But I always told myself it wasn't that bad, that all marriages have their challenges. I failed you and Jennifer by not addressing it sooner." The revelation that Robert had been aware of Barbara's manipulations, but chosen peace over confrontation, added another layer of complexity to Michael's emotional processing. "I'm angry at him too," he confessed to me. "He saw what was happening and did nothing." Extended family members began taking sides as news of the incident spread through the family grapevine, often with Barbara's version reaching them first. "Your mother tells me you're overreacting to a simple mistake," Michael's elderly aunt chided during an uncomfortable phone call. "After all she's done for you, this is how you repay her? By keeping her from her own husband?" Others, particularly those who had experienced Barbara's manipulations firsthand, offered support and validation. "I always knew something wasn't right there," Michael's cousin admitted. "The way family gatherings became military operations that had to follow her exact specifications." Robert consulted with a divorce attorney for the first time in his life, the appointment representing a psychological threshold he'd never imagined crossing. "I don't know if I'll file papers," he told Michael during their weekly lunch. "But after 40 years of walking on eggshells, I need to understand my options." The news devastated Barbara, who showed up at our house again, this time alternating between threats and pleading. "This is all because of her," she shouted, pointing at me from our front porch as Michael blocked the doorway. "Everything was fine until she poisoned you against me." The irony of her accusation given recent events might have been comical in any other context. The situation reached a breaking point when we returned home from dinner one evening to find Barbara had used her old emergency key, which we thought we'd collected, to enter our house. She sat in our living room, having clearly gone through our personal papers, which lay scattered across the coffee table. "We need to talk as a family," she announced, as if breaking into our home were perfectly normal. Michael, who had been working through his complex feelings with a therapist, responded with a calm decisiveness that would have been impossible weeks earlier. "Mom, you need to leave now or I'm calling the police." His voice held no anger, just resolved certainty. "I'm changing our locks tonight, and if you come back without an invitation, I will file for a restraining order." The clinical language cut through Barbara's defenses more effectively than any emotional outburst could have. She left without further argument, though the wounded look she cast backward was clearly designed to trigger Michael's guilt. That night, as he installed new deadbolts on our doors, Michael observed, "She's used my love for her as a weapon my entire life." I never saw it clearly until now. Barbara agreed to a psychological evaluation only after Robert made it a condition of any potential reconciliation. The diagnosis, narcissistic personality disorder with borderline features, provided a clinical framework for understanding her behavior, but did little to repair the relational damage she'd caused. Having a name for it helps, Jennifer reflected during our now regular sister-in-law coffee dates, but it doesn't erase what she did or guarantee she'll change. 6 weeks after the incident, Michael and Barbara met for coffee at a neutral location, a meeting I supported but didn't attend. "She started by blaming you again," Michael reported afterward, looking emotionally drained. Then shifted to blaming her own mother, then her medication, then finally admitted she might have overreacted to feeling excluded from family decisions. The minimal accountability represented progress, albeit microscopic. Robert filed formal separation papers after Barbara refused to continue therapy beyond the initial evaluation. "I've given her 40 years of chances," he explained to the family. "I don't have another 40 years left to wait for change." The decision sent Barbara into a tailspin of victim behavior, calling family members at all hours to lament her abandonment. "After everything I've done, this is the thanks I get," became her constant refrain, the irony of her statement apparently lost on her. As the dust began to settle, Michael and I found ourselves reassessing our own relationship, strengthened through adversity but also mindful of unhealthy communication patterns he'd unconsciously absorbed from his family of origin. "I don't want to be like her," he confided one night. "I catch myself sometimes, wanting to control outcomes or manipulate situations to avoid conflict." His self-awareness and commitment to breaking generational patterns only deepened my respect and love for him. We discussed the possibility of relocating temporarily, putting some geographical distance between ourselves and the family drama, while everyone adjusted to the new normal. "Maybe 6 months in Chicago for that project your company offered?" Michael suggested. "Give everyone some breathing room." The idea had merit, though we agreed to make no major decisions until the initial crisis had fully stabilized. Through it all, the unexpected blessing was the strengthening of bonds that Barbara had long sought to weaken. Jennifer and I developed a genuine friendship based on mutual support and understanding. Michael and Robert began building a relationship, independent of Barbara's mediation, discovering shared interests they'd never fully explored. And Michael and I emerged with a deeper commitment to honesty and direct communication, however uncomfortable it might sometimes be. "In a weird way," Michael observed as we walked along the river near our home, "Mom's worst act ended up giving us all the freedom to become a healthier family, just not in the way she'll ever be able to understand." 6 months after the night that changed everything, we gathered for a very different kind of family dinner at Jennifer and Steve's home. Robert arrived alone, looking years younger despite the difficult months behind him. "Separation agrees with you, Dad?" Jennifer teased as she embraced him, the lightness in their interaction a testament to the healing that had begun. Michael squeezed my hand as we entered, both of us remembering how different family gatherings had felt before. The walking on eggshells, the hypervigilance, the dread that had become so normal we hardly recognized it until it was gone. Barbara was not present, by mutual agreement. She had begun consistent therapy, finally accepting that reconciliation with the family required genuine change rather than performative remorse. "It's still early days," Robert had explained when arranging the gathering. Her therapist suggests smaller one-on-one interactions before group settings. We all understood this was as much for our protection as for Barbara's recovery process. The change in family dynamics was remarkable. Conversations flowed naturally without Barbara's orchestration, topics expanding and contracting organically, rather than being rigidly controlled. Robert spoke about his new apartment with genuine enthusiasm, describing the cooking classes he'd joined and the volunteer work that filled his newfound free time. "I should have done this 20 years ago," he admitted, the statement holding regret but also self-compassion. "But I'm doing it now, and that's what matters." For my part, I found myself more confident in family settings, no longer constantly scanning for hidden aggressions or measuring my words against potential manipulations. When Jennifer suggested we make these dinners a monthly tradition, I agreed, without the internal dread such commitments once triggered. Michael had undergone perhaps the most profound transformation. Through consistent therapy and painful self-examination, he had begun untangling the complicated web of loyalty, guilt, and conditional love that had defined his relationship with his mother. "I can love her without accepting her behavior," he explained to me one night. "And I can set boundaries without abandoning her. Those distinctions saved my sanity." Barbara's journey toward accountability moved in fits and starts. Some weeks brought genuine insights and ownership of her actions. Others saw her revert to victim narratives and manipulation attempts. "Recovery isn't linear," her therapist reminded the family during a group session that Barbara had reluctantly agreed to, especially with deeply ingrained personality patterns. The most significant breakthrough came when Barbara participated in a mediated conversation with me, arranged through our respective therapists. Her hands trembled as she faced me across the neutral office space, her usual perfect appearance, slightly faded, hair less precisely styled, clothes less immaculately pressed. "I want to acknowledge what I did," she began, reading from notes her therapist had clearly helped her prepare. "I put medication in a drink I intended for you because I felt threatened by your place in Michael's life." The admission, though clearly difficult for her, lacked the emotional manipulation of her previous apologies. For the first time, I glimpsed the frightened woman beneath the controlling exterior. Someone so terrified of abandonment she would risk criminal behavior to maintain her centrality in her son's life. "Thank you for being honest," I responded, maintaining appropriate emotional boundaries while acknowledging her effort. "That helps me understand your actions, even though I can't condone them." We would never be close. Too much damage had been done for that. But we established a framework for civil interaction that would allow family gatherings to resume eventually. Jennifer's healing took a different path. "I'm working through decades of feeling second best," she confided during one of our regular coffee dates. "Always the less favored child, always the one who saw through mom's behavior but wasn't believed." With Barbara's manipulation no longer dividing them, she and Michael rebuilt their sibling relationship, discovering the natural alliance that should have been theirs all along. Robert found his voice after 4 decades of accommodation, pursuing interests Barbara had long dismissed and reconnecting with friends she had alienated. "I keep discovering parts of myself I had packed away," he told Michael during one of their fishing trips, a new tradition they had established. "It's like meeting myself again after a very long absence." The most profound lesson for me was learning to trust my instincts without apology. The night I switched those glasses had required certainty in my own perceptions, despite years of Barbara's attempts to paint me as oversensitive or paranoid. "You saved Dad's life," Jennifer insisted, though I maintained Barbara likely hadn't intended serious harm. "Maybe not directly, but you exposed a situation that was slowly poisoning all of us." Michael and I had lengthy, sometimes difficult conversations about our future, particularly regarding children and what role Barbara would play in their lives. "Supervised visits only, at least initially," Michael decided, a boundary that would have been unimaginable before the incident. "Children deserve protection from manipulation, even from their grandmother." As hard-won wisdom settled into new family patterns, I reflected on how facing the painful truth had ultimately been less destructive than maintaining the comfortable lie. Barbara's actions, while inexcusable, had forced a long-overdue reckoning that allowed authentic relationships to finally develop. The easy path of conflict avoidance had enabled decades of toxicity. Only by confronting it directly could genuine healing begin. At our most recent gathering, as I watched Michael laugh unreservedly with his father and sister, I felt profound gratitude for the painful journey that had brought us to this healthier place. The family that gathered now was more genuine, more honest, and ultimately more loving than the carefully controlled image Barbara had maintained for so long. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between keeping peace and confronting a harmful situation? It can be terrifying to trust your instincts when everyone else seems to accept problematic behavior as normal. I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult family situations. Remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to stand firmly in your truth, even when it feels like you're standing alone. Thank you for listening. to my story, and I hope it gives courage to anyone facing similar challenges in their own relationships.